And the reason it is one of my favorite parts is because I feel in Genesis it's the beginning, right? In Greek it's the beginning. And in Hebrew they call it Bereshit, which means in the beginning. The first book in Hebrew, first word in the Hebrew Bible is Bereshit, in the beginning. So they call that book Bereshit. And so it shapes our worldview. That if we're Christians, the Genesis begins to shape who we believe we are, who we believe God is, who we believe He is in terms of Creator, and we as His creation, and the world around us. It's so foundational. And I feel that, when we look at the life of Christ, and He always goes back to the law. So we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I knew you were going to come there. The first 5 books, and we call the Pentateuch, Penta, the 5, first 5, and the Jews, the Hebrews call it the Torah, which is also translated, often translated as law. So Torah is the teaching for the law. You hear Jesus all the time, he talks about the law of Moses. So when he says the law of Moses, he's not just talking about all those lists in Leviticus that you probably fall asleep reading sometimes. He's talking about the Torah, the law. He's talking about the 5 books. So as it says in the law. So he might be referring to something that was in Genesis. And often Jesus did refer to things that were known to the Hebrew people in Genesis. When they asked him about divorce, he went back to Genesis 1 and said, "Is it not written?" You see that a lot. Jesus said, "Is it not written? Is it not written?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. So he goes back to the law all the time, the law of Moses. So when we're talking about Genesis 1 through 11, this is part of the law of Moses, the teaching. So we might, becoming more Hebrew, think Hebrew. I like to say that a lot when we read, especially when we're reading Genesis. But in the New Testament too, we have to take off our, 2013 San Francisco mindset and start to think Hebrew, start to think first century, start to think 1000 BC, start to think it's hard to do that, but we want to think Hebrew. So we're looking at the teachings. And what does Genesis 1 through 11 have to teach us? So what are some things off the top of your head that you can go to Genesis 1 to learn about? What's one of the big ones?
How God created the earth.
Right. How God created the earth, so creation. That's a big part of our worldview as Christians. What do we believe about creation? And so as Jason goes through chapter 1, those things will come clear. So how God created the earth, what other aspect of creation is really important in Genesis 1?
How He created Adam and Eve.
Right.
Yeah.
How He created Adam and Eve. And collectively we would call Adam and Eve humanity. How did God create humanity? And one of the most important questions and answers that I think we have to wrestle with in our lives as Christians is, who are you? Who are you? What's the first way you would define yourself? I'm a
Image of God.
I have been made in the image of God. God created humankind. It says man in a lot of translations. My favorite translation is God created humankind. In the image of God, in His own image He created them, male and female. Right. And later, the creation story, we get more details. And they're called Adam and Eve. They get their names later on. And Adam, well, I'll let Jason go into that. I'll go into it too later. But Adam, it's man. And the earth in Hebrew is Adamah. So you have the Adam who's created from the Adamah. So he's like the earth man, right? He's not a spaceman. He's not an ape man. He's made from the earth. And where does he return to? Where do we learn he returns to in Genesis? To the earth. So we are made of the earth and the land. And the land is such an important concept in Hebrew, the land. I mean, the Hebrew, the national newspapers, if anyone know the national newspaper, Israel, it's called Haaretz, the land. It's so important to them, right? I mean, that's what all the fights are about. That's what the wars are about, the land. This is the land, the ground. That's what it's all about for the Hebrews, is our land. And so God begins to create the earth. He creates man and woman. We begin to know who we are. We are created in the image of God. And so Genesis 1, really, it's all about creation. And what does God call the creation of? What does he call it? Okay.
Oh.
Mediocre.
It's good, yeah.
Good. Good, right?
Good.
And then what does he call humanity? When he finishes humanity, he calls it, on the sixth day, he called it very good. And in Hebrew, it says tov. Like mazel tov, it's,
Yeah.
tov is good. And in Hebrew, it's tov. So good.
Oh, really good.
So yeah, it translates to very good. Instead of good, that's very good. So he says it's very good. So we know that God has created us to be very good in a good creation. So just begin to shape who we are. And so Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, we'll talk about, 1 and 2, we'll talk about creation. And so we see, I'm just reserving this to write questions later. So we see this cycle in the beginning, Genesis 1 through 11, of creation. God created us, who we need to be. So it records this account of this interrelationship between God the Creator and we and our surroundings as His creation. And in Genesis 3 we begin to see that He's given us what people debated about so much, which I don't like to debate about too much, but what does He give us? He gives us choice. What choice did Adam and Eve have to make?
Follow God or
Right.
Yeah.
Obey
Yeah.
or disobey. Be a reflection. Oh, go ahead, Mary June.
He was supposed to obey, except when he, when Eve talked him into eating the fruit of the forbidden fruit.
Thank you, Mary June, for not calling it an apple. I'm so impressed. You didn't call it an apple. That's right. That is a fruit. That's so good. I'm so impressed. I'm not surprised that you know that, but yeah, there's this choice, right? Do we want to be in relationship with God? Do we want to continue to be who He's created us to be, in fellowship with Him, in oneness with Him, like Him, a reflector made in His image, or do we want to do our own thing? Or do we want to be like God in a different way? Like, I want to be just like you and do what I want to do. I want to be the creator too. I want to create my own future. I want to create my own choices. I want to create my own boundaries. I want to create my own set of teachings. I like my own laws a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
So we see this cycle. It starts, this is what's looked at as the primeval cycle in Genesis 1 through 11. God creates, we uncreate. We decide we want to be human in our own way. So the first thing that happens with Adam and Eve, they make a choice that makes them a little bit less human than God is intending for them to be. So then we move on to the next story, Cain and Abel. What happens right away? You see these two brothers, and then what happens? The worst possible outcome of a fight.
Yeah.
Right? Murder, the first murder.
What happens? Cain killed.
Cain kills Abel.
Yeah.
How low can you sink in
Yeah.
humanity? You kill your own brother. And then we see this next person, Lamech. He kills someone. He calls himself mighty. He kills some people think he may have even killed his own son. Right. So you go from Adam and Eve in the garden, God's perfect creation and union. They disobey. They're thrown out of the garden. You have a murder. You have another murder. You have someone exalting himself. You see this cycle: creation, uncreation, creation. But God intervenes each time, and He's merciful. You don't really see Him. There's no commentary about what happens to Lamech. It's just up to the reader. He doesn't. What happens to Cain when he kills Abel? Does God kill Cain?
No.
been a very divisive verse, a verse that people have used to promote racism. Say the mark is, oh, we turned him black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the mark.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that. There's absolutely no justification or intimation of it. But hey, we're uncreated people that can use the Word of God for our own purposes if we don't stay within its original intention, which is to bless.
Use it to kill.
Right. To bless or to curse.
Yeah.
What should we use the Word for?
Two choices.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Dating.
As for me and my house, I shall serve the Lord, right? And what do you choose this day? Blessing or curse? So thank you, Marcy, for that. That's exactly what the law is meant to do. It's meant to bring a blessing. And God, each time, it doesn't seem merciful, like, wow, you cursed him and gave him a mark and put him out in the wilderness, but what really should his punishment have been?
Yeah.
Right, death. And especially in every other culture besides the Hebrew culture in this time, in the ancient Near East, in this time period, every other culture, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. So Yahweh's way, the Hebrew way, the way of these Hebrew people is actually it's more merciful. Who is this God? Who is this Yahweh that doesn't kill when you kill? He finds another way. And it's merciful. It doesn't seem merciful to us in our mindset now, really, but in the ancient times, in other creation stories of the Babylonians and Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, their creation stories were much more violent. And their laws were much less merciful. So we see creation and uncreation. It's starting to be this major theme. And after, and God brings, what he always brings to the table is order. Even in the beginning it says, the earth was formless without void. And God brings order to it. He takes chaos, he brings order to it, and he subdues it. And in our actions, chaos of murder, God brings order and he subdues us. So it's this constant sin rebellion cycle, and then God brings grace and peace. And he brings this creation. He wants to return the world. I think it's like he's constantly trying to figure out, like, how can I get back to the garden? How can we get back to the beginning here? And that's, for me as a Christian, as I really study Genesis, especially Genesis 1 and 2, I think that's where I'm supposed to be. That's God's intention for me, is to be in that oneness, this place with him. So how can I get back there? I've messed it up along the way, but God really wants me to not only see myself as being made in his image, but to see you as someone made in his image. And if I can see you and see that you are an image bearer of God, if I can see Brian and see he bears the image of God in him, I'll look at you differently. I won't look at you as annoying, stupid, moron, in my way, taking time that I don't have, asking me for change when I'm walking down the street, asking me the same thing over and over and over again. I won't see you in that way. I'll see you as you're a divine image bearer of God. I am a divine image bearer of God. We have more trouble, I think, thinking of ourselves in that positive light than seeing other people. I think sometimes we're nicer to others than we are to ourselves. So God would have us to go back to the garden, to go back to that place. But what we see in Genesis 1 through 11 is just this constant increase of sin and rebellion. So it gets to the point, so we have, where did I leave off with Lama? And then, you remember there's a verse about the sons of God coming down and having relationships and knowing the daughters of men, right? So then there's something strange going on there. Lamech has 2 wives also. So all these things happen outside of what God intends. Sexuality, that sort of, the lines start to become very blurred. And then what does God finally decide to do in the Noah story? Right. I think that's the Hebrew translation too. It doesn't take long, right? We're on chapter 6. We're only 6 chapters in.
Okay.
Right.
Right. It says, chapter 6, verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So we see that the cycle got so bad that God, it grieved him, his own creation. For those of you, who are parents with older children, there have probably been times where your kids, they must grieve. I know I grieved my mother. My kids are too little yet where I felt like, I'm sorry I ever had you. They're not so little, still really cute. They don't talk back. But I know if you're raising a teenager, I know there were times where my mother probably just felt like, you're a good kid. You guys are getting to know me. I was a really bad kid. I barely graduated high school. I was a bad teenager. I was not a good kid. I know. You see me today, but I was not a good kid.
You grieved your mother.
I grieved my mother. I would call her stupid to her face. I was not a good, I'm not proud of it, but I was not. I know there were times where it must have been just between her and God, things that she said. So God felt that. He felt that way too. So what was his solution? Let's return. Humanity has just brought chaos, sin, and rebellion, this cycle. Let's just end it. So he brings this watery chaos back. Right? There's a flood. This is the flood story. And every ancient culture in the Near East has a flood story. And so this also, Genesis also serves as a polemic. It also serves as a story to correct all the other stories that are out there. There are a lot of stories in the Anu Elish, in Gilgamesh, these ancient epics that have a flood story. And there's always a mud man or a flood man, and he always has a boat. And so we have in this ancient story that we regard as the truth, there is a flood story and there's a man with a boat. You'll see that in all these ancient stories. Which one is the truth? Is there one that's true, or are they all true? A lot of scholars would say they're all true. It's just this common memory that everybody has. So we have to decide in our world, is there one story, or are there lots of different ways of just explaining what happened with the flood and how did humanity survive? But here's Moses's, the oral tradition of the Hebrews finally written down, saying this is what happened. So how does God show mercy in this instance with the flood?
He chose one family to remain and start again.
Some of the animals live.
Right, that's sort of, they didn't have to suffer, we love animals. He didn't wipe all of them out, but a lot of them he did. And I struggle in some ways. Maybe I overthink it, but Noah's Ark is one of the most popular Sunday school stories, right? The rainbow and the big boat and the rain. I'm sure Betty knows this song. And, the rain came down and the floods came up. The rain came down. That's actually a different song. That's the House on the Rock. There's a Who Built the Ark. There's all these little, an arky, God. And so I don't like this arky. But I know I don't like arky. I don't like the bad grammar. But so here you have this story, and so for a child, they're not thinking, they're not reading in between the lines.
Right.
No.
But all of mankind has wiped out, including babies, children, women, sons, daughters, mothers. Did Noah's parents come on the boat?
I don't think
I
so,
don't-
but I mean, life.
I have.
No, it doesn't say
I don't
so.
know.
I don't
I don't-
remember.
They might have been. Did his brothers, his sisters?
I don't
Didn't
remember.
say, I don't.
No, I think
Nobody
it's just his wife
really-
and his children.
Children, yeah, I thought.
And his son's wife.
His neighbors?
Mhm. And then was it 3 sons?
Yeah, so 3 sons. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Japheth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And their wives, right?
Their
Yeah.
wives.
What about the wives' brothers and sisters,
I don't think
mother,
so.
father? So how do you think that?
Well, I think he invited everybody, but everybody thought he was strange.
Yeah.
And, that he was out of it, and so didn't follow. Yeah, so they had, I think they had that choice, I think. Is it in there somewhere that says that? I don't know.
That's a good question. We haven't really got any questions, but when we get to Noah,
Mhm.
why don't we look about, did people have a choice?
Right. I
Or
thought
did
they-
God only say, only you're allowed?
I think they had a choice for some reason, I can't remember. Yeah, but I thought so.
I think that's a good thing to look at, because,
Okay.
you know, what was God's,
Uh,
what did God decide to do? So the ark story, it takes up 3 chapters, 6, 7, 8. It's retold because God brings
On
about,
chapter 7, it says, the Lord then said to Noah, go into the ark, and you and your whole family.
Oh.
for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation.
It doesn't mention about other people being invited, though.
I don't know.
So my point,
Yeah, I thought maybe movies
you know,
or
kind of
something.
my point there was how difficult would that have been?
Mhm.
You know, what if,
Yeah.
oh,
So-
Jenny, just you,
Mhm.
say goodbye to your mom, say goodbye to your sisters,
Yeah.
your brothers, and grab Michael and your kids.
Wow. Man, I'm the neighbor. I'm
You know,
like-
that's when
Yeah.
I'm reading this
Yeah.
Noah's Ark story to Jesse, and I'm thinking, gosh, this is a horrible story. It's so violent.
Yeah.
Genesis
I think
1
it's
through
true.
11 is the Bible. I struggle reading a lot of stories to her because they're so like David and Goliath. She loves that, and I'm like,
Oh.
you know, I change the words. I'm like, he fell down. You know, killed him with a rock, and and I'm like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a violent book.
Yeah.
It is a bloody, violent book. What happens to Jesus? It's not an easy. It's, you know, you can make it easy for children to understand, which is a beautiful thing about it, because you can start to learn things early. But it's also there are a lot of questions. So this is an interesting. We kind of sort of answered it, but why? You know, why was Noah the only righteous one left? And then we get these several chapters. It goes into even chapter 9, 6, 7, 8, 9. And they tell the story over. There's some what people see as inconsistencies, like was it 40 days or was it how many weeks? Was there rain? But what you see is that God brings, again, order out of chaos.
Yeah.
There's this watery chaos, and that's a big theme in ancient Near Eastern cultures, the gods gods of chaos, Tiamat, the water god, bringing, you know, floods, using water as a weapon. And for God, he brings order out of it, and the waters go back. And there's a new covenant. So now we start to see covenant coming into play in Genesis. By the end of the Noah story, and then we see, you know, Shem, Ham. And then what happens? You know, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they have this episode with their father.
Yeah.
And that also, there are lots of different interpretations of that. More, you know, the further along we get in translation and understanding other stories, there's the possibilities become even worse. The more that I've studied that particular incident with the 3 sons and Noah getting drunk, and what happens in that interaction and how they dishonor him.
Yeah.
It's much more explicit than you might think it is. Another thing not to really, it's like, gosh, do you want to talk about that with your kids? Not really, sometimes. Because why would the punishment be so harsh? I think we always think, like, does the punishment fit the crime? And with God, we want to be able to answer yes. But a lot of people choose not to follow God because they feel the punishment doesn't fit the crime. They think God is too harsh. And I think if we look at Genesis in parallel with other ancient Near Eastern stories, we'll find that he's more merciful than the other gods that are being viewed in the world. And I think that you'll find that with Christianity when you compare it with other worldviews. Even though, because there have been so many wrongs done in the name of Christ, people won't readily accept that. But if we look back, we see God making covenant. And we see him starting over with Noah. But then in chapter 11, so we made it through our overview almost. Chapter 11, there's city-state now. The people, they're called like in Hebrew, they're the Shinar people. What did they decide to do? What did they build? The Tower of...
Yeah.
So where are they going?
Trying to be
They want to be like God. I want to be in the heavens. I want to be like God. I want to be high. God is called Most High. I want to be Most High. We want to be like God. And so God, he has to do something. Again, he has to intervene. So he separates them by their language, by their tongue. And it's interesting, there's a verse where it says, the Lord said, look, so this is chapter 11, verse 6. The Lord said, look, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. And that really speaks to me about the power of unity. God says, if you guys all decide, if we all in this room decide to do one thing, nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Because we are made in God's image. If we work together to do something, to create something we want for good, we can do it, or for evil. What if we all decided, we just put all our energies towards how can we rob a bank? Can we do it? How long?
Yes.
It might take us 10 years, but look, Jenny, she's like, we can do it. We can do it. I've already got the first part of the plan.
Yes, I've read a lot of crime novels.
We can do it. People rob banks all the time and get away with it. We got a call this week that people were trying to cash a check, $1,500, $1,500 check. Bill got a call at work. Did you write a check to Tyler so-and-so? He's at our branch trying to cash a check. And I think it was my signature. So, and then an hour later he got another call. Now this guy's at another branch trying to cash another check of yours.
Wow.
And so he's texting me and I'm texting him. I'm like, no, I wrote, one of the checks was to Betty. I said, no, I wrote her a check. That check, $21.11, that was to Betty. And it was not for $1,500.
Whoa.
Someone got a hold of your ID.
But anyway, someone got a hold of that check. I think
I
someone
did
got a
with
hold of
that.
the check.
I did it with that.
Someone got a hold of, I think, Betty's
Someone
check.
did it to my mom
And one
once.
was to my mother-in-law for $90.
Someone actually did it to my mother. We used to live in the Fillmore, and they ended up catching her though.
Right.
She did get
And
caught.
it was probably one woman who learned how to
Yeah.
to do that check from someone else. Just one person can do a lot of damage. Imagine if we all got together.
Something happened to me. Someone used my name and credit card numbers, and they did that to me. And it kind of put me really in a foxhole for the past 6 or 7 years.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and I use a credit card for other stuff though too. But the main picture still.
Yeah, it's terrible what one or two people can do. And so they all come together and so God would say, I've got to put a stop to this somehow. He doesn't, it's not so bad that he, destroys mankind again. But I think he's seeing this pattern. He got to the point where he wiped everyone out except one family, and then it doesn't take, we'll look at how many generations. It'll be interesting to study chapter 10 because it's all the full genealogy. And I looked, I was like, oh, that's my week. But there's a lot to be learned in those genealogies. If you look at them closely, there's a purpose why they're there. These are the one of the names that people look at as Genesis is called the book of generations, because it says these are the generations of, these are the generations of. So it's also it's an ancient account of the Hebrew people, who they are. And so it's a part of who we are. If we want to look and say, like, who are we? We go back to Genesis. You know, we go back to the beginning. And so by chapter 11, Tower of Babel, more genealogy. And then in chapter 11 and verse 26, we are introduced to someone named Terah, who lived 70 years, and then he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And we learn about this man named Abram. So God chooses another person, just one person. He starts out. I'm going to start over. And then that becomes the stories of the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So God starts over and he builds this nation, the people of Abraham. Father Abraham.
I remember that.
Father Abraham. Yeah, but you know, just turn
Yeah, we
out.
used to do that at
Right.
our Bible school. We had a night Christian education day for like every individual's first union when I was growing up. There was like one for the adults, young adults, and for the kids. So we had our it was like doing a Christian education week at First Union. It was like 86, 87. We would sing that song, Father Abraham.
Right, because you're learning about
Right.
our history as a Judeo-Christian faith. Abraham is
Right.
central.
Yeah.
So God starts over with a chosen people. Abraham begins to use the father of the Hebrews, who become the chosen people, and who comes out of that nation? Christ. So this is the beginning of the story of Christ. This is the genealogy of Christ. How does Matthew, the book of Matthew, is that your favorite book, Matthew? The book of Matthew? Are you that biased or no?
That's me.
Matthew, flip to Matthew, the book of Matthew. Can you find the book of Matthew for me in the New Testament? The very first book in the New Testament, and read to me the first verse of Matthew 1. Okay. How does the story of Jesus in Matthew start out? In light of what we've learned about Genesis, what did they say? Verse 1.
A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
Yeah. Very important, these genealogies. We kind of get annoyed with them, like just skip that part. To the Hebrew people, it's very important because who is Jesus the son of?
Abraham.
And it's important to the Hebrews. The book of Matthew was written to the Hebrew people, right? It's very important to start out to say this is an account of the genealogy, the generations of. Jesus, the Messiah, he was the son of David, the son of Abraham. That means something. And it means something in Genesis 10 when you read about Sidon and Heth and Admah and Zeboim and all these people where you're like, and Archibald, and it means something to the people, the original readers. And it can mean something to us if we're willing to really put on our Hebrew caps and think about it. So I hope that's what we'll do as we go through Genesis 1 through 11. So the big cycle is creation, uncreation, and then in Christ. We can always kind of look through the lens of Christ when it's appropriate. Recreation. God recreates. He never just says uncreation, that's it. Someone crying?
Yeah, sounds like it.
We're all,
Sharon's out there. Yeah, I know. And I see Lauren.
I see some wings flying. So we have that's the big picture, is the cycle of looking at Genesis 1 through 11 in terms of human beings being created, uncreated, and recreated in the image of God. Not just in the way we want to be. I'm going to recreate myself, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Dye my hair
Makeover.
purple. Yeah. I'm going to be a new me in the image of God. So it's always very important that we go back to the garden. Well, what was it like in the garden? You know, what was it like? What was God's original intention for us as his image bearers? So as we do that, I think we'll find that God has a lot to say to us in these first few stories. They're not just stories that we should know because it's part of the Bible. They're stories that tell us who we are. You learn a lot about yourself and about who we are as Christians by studying these verses, these chapters. So I hope that it'll be a really fruitful study for us together. Jason will start next week with chapter 1. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. If you would want, sort of, I didn't give you any note. We didn't give you any notice.
Jason is doing next week.
So Jason is doing next week, and then Rajiv, then I think the lay Sunday, and you know you can use those lay Sundays maybe to talk about, come up with more questions for us because we don't answer.
So it was Abraham, because it says Abram here, and it's the story of Abraham.
Right.
Yeah.
The name did get changed on the way.
Right. Abram, and then he is become father of nations.
Father of Nations.
So he starts out as just Abram, and Av in Hebrew, Av is father, so he's father.
Yeah.
And becomes Abram is sort of like a singular, and then he becomes Abraham. And then if you think about one of the names for God is Elohim, and some of you might know some Muslim people who are named Abraham instead of Abraham. So this is just the plural in Hebrew, the im. So Elo, so it's interesting. Sometimes God is referred to as the plural, Elohim. And Abraham, so father of nations. He's father of nations when he becomes king. So,
And then Abraham means father of...
father of nations. Abram is just father.
Yeah.
Okay.
Abram.
So Ham and Hum both, you can use them interchangeably.
Yeah, this is just the English, what do you call it? Yeah.
So really it was
Abraham. If you looked at, if you read it in Hebrew, it's Abraham.
Got it, okay.
It's Abraham, and in English, it's Abraham.
And the last one, tell me, what is that?
Oh, Elohim.
Oh, that's how we
What
address
did
God.
what did you call it again?
Elohim is translated as God.
Did
So
you
it's
say
a
something
plural.
about the plural?
It's a plural.
And
And
does
so
that have anything to do with the Trinity?
I think it is an interesting observation when we look at when Elohim is used and when Yahweh is used, and how that
Isn't there something
defines
that
the
comes
text.
before Elohim? Is it Adonai Elohim? There's some phrase that they
So
often
there's,
use
there's
before
so
Elohim.
many names for God in the Bible. And if I were teaching Genesis 1, I would talk a lot about Elohim because it says in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, I wish I had my Hebrew Bible. I'm almost positive. Yeah, it's Elohim. It's Eloheinu, or the God. So it's Elohim. So chapter 1. So a lot of people, they look at, I should probably finish, but Genesis was put together from lots of different fragments. There's some people who believe different theories. I think there were different fragments. And some people think there were the Elohists, people who believed in, and that whenever you see Elohim, that means they were the people who wrote this part of the story. And then there were the Yahwehists, which is J. So I don't know, I was talking to Bill and I was like, I don't know if people are going to be interested in this. Because I guess,
this kind of stuff.
yeah, I like this kind of stuff, but I don't know. So there's Yahwehist because there's no Y.
Right.
It's Yahweh. And that's a Jehovah's Witness, a big deal. There's no J in Hebrew. There's no Jehovah, it's Yahovah. So, like, go to your door and say, there's no J. No. So there's the J, there's the Elohim, the priestly, and then the Deuteronomists. So every one of them has a different view of what's important, and their part of the story has a different focus. So you have a creation account from the Elohists, which is chapter 1, and then you have chapter 2 and 3, which come from the Yahwehists. So it's interesting in Elohim. So it says God is So the way I look at it is, in Hebrew it's called, there are plurals, they're called plurals of majesties. So the heavens and the earth. So in Hebrew, heavens and earth they're plural. They also end in im. Shemayim.
Like the royal we.
Right, it's like the royal we, yes. We parted through.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Exactly. And so Elohim, they say, oh, this is the plural of royalty, that's all it is. But is it? We're created in the image of God, male and female, He created them. So if we were created as, we know that we were created in the beginning, just one person, right? Adam. We were
So
Adam.
was Jesus used there too.
Right. So if we're a reflector, I really wish I was teaching Genesis 1. So we have Elohim, and then we've been created in His image. Who's with Him? It's, it talks about like the angels. He's always saying like, let us. He says, let us create, right?
So that's Jesus.
So some people think that angels maybe were, he's just talking about the angels. Maybe, but in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. John, first verse in John chapter 1. If you look at John 1 and Genesis 1, they're very parallel in their prose and their poetry. So you can't forget that Genesis it's written it's poetic. If I read it to you in Hebrew, you would hear a lot of rhyming. Like the void and darkness, it's bohu and tohu. It's rhymes on purpose because it's poetry. So then, if we're made in the image of God, the Imago Dei, we're male and female. And I think what's important about that is that we were made in the image of somebody who in and of himself exists as his own community. We're not meant to be alone. You're not meant to be alone. No one is meant to be alone. We are meant to be in community with each other, with God. And not just two, but there's this third person, and who can be the third person in our relationships? Starts with a J. It can be. And how? Through the power of the Holy Spirit that comes. So you see this reflection, and I think it's a very powerful word, Elohim. Because some people will read into it more than should be read into it. But if you just make it very simple, I don't think that it's going outside of the original intention or what God would allow us to see in Elohim and in this community, in this oneness. And I think Genesis 2 talks about, in the beginning they were one. They were just Adam. And then God splits them off. And it's a really interesting story. I'll probably try to talk about it a little. I find it more, it's not, you look at the language, you look at the stories, it's not just about a rib. It's about so much more than that. So I do think Elohim is very significant in that it's plural, and that He says, let us make mankind in our image. So it's not singular. It's just one person. So what you believe about who God is, and if one person's more in charge than the other person, is God more in charge than Jesus, or Jesus more in charge? What does that say about your relationship as male and female? Who's in charge? Does somebody have to be in charge? Does somebody have to be, more prominent or less prominent or subservient? I think that this relationship is perfect. It's very powerful, and it's used in the Bible, again, is used for evil and not for good. And the Bible is one book that I think liberates everything. More than any other religious text out there. So Genesis 1 through 11, I hope we'll see things like that. And I will always harken back to this, so it's not just going to be tucked away. And I can talk more, I'm sure Rajiv and Jason can talk more about this too. But if you have questions, read up on Genesis 1 this week, and I'll put it in the e-bulletin. And if you have questions, email them to me or to Jason. I'll make sure Jason gets them. But just, email Jason directly and say, I noticed in verse, 17, this doesn't make sense to me. Can we look at that and have a discussion about it? Yes, Matt.
Wait, if Adam means man, what does Eve mean?
Well,
Adam or?
Eve was just her name. So it means like mother of mother. Eve is mother. So she doesn't get her name till after they're kicked out, after the curse. She's not named until then. So in the ancient Near East, in those cultures, if somebody gave you a name, that meant that I was superior to you. I give you your name. So after the curse, she becomes Eve. She's not Eve in the beginning. She's woman. So actually, they don't even call him Adam in the creation stories. It's Ish and Isha. So the man is Ish, and the woman is Isha. So it's not Adam and Eve, it's man and woman. And Adam is the human. I like to sort of say that Adam means the human. And because, the translation's like, oh, let's just call him Adam. Like, that's his name. That wasn't his name. In chapters 2 and 3, that wasn't his name. It's Ha-Adam, the Adam. He has a definite article in front of it. But they don't put that in English because it would sound weird. Like God said to the Adam. But it's Ha-Adam in the Hebrew. And then when they talk about man and woman, it's Ish and Isha. And in Genesis 1, when they talk about male and female, so you have man, woman, male, female, Adam and Eve, male and female are different words. Those are words that mean the man, it's means sharp, and then the woman, it means cavernous. So you see even this sort of biological, anatomical like description of male and female, and so it's like I can't remember the Hebrew words offhand. It's not that it matters, but I've studied a lot about that because I think it's really significant. What does it mean to be male and female? Is that significant that God created us male and female? And why just one? What does that mean for us as who we define ourselves as the image of God? How can the image of God best be reflected?
Just a quick terminology question. So when I've always wondered this, when people say the Near East versus Middle East versus Far East, what is considered Near East and what is considered Middle East?
So ancient Near East would be like the area of like Egypt, Mesopotamia, Iran, like the Middle East pretty much now, and they call it the Mediterranean Basin. So in the ancient Near East would be really, I wish Bill were here because he would be able to tell you exactly like every thing. But you look in the back of your Bible, they're great maps.
But like now when people say they're a Near East scholar versus Middle Eastern scholar.
So Persian
would be
the
Near
Persian
East.
Empire, the land of Canaan would be this ancient Near Eastern, and it always tends to include Egypt as well.
Okay, and then middle would include which one?
So Middle East is a modern term, and ancient Near East would almost always encompass the Middle East, but would be modern Middle East. But the ancient Near East is more.
So when people are saying they're Near Eastern scholars, they're probably meaning more biblical times versus.
Probably,
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And they would probably say, they would just cut out ancient.
Right, they say Near Eastern, but okay.
They're probably meaning ancient.
Right, because I was thinking there was like lines. Here's near, here's middle, here's far. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'll talk about it whenever I do my studies, that's significant because the Bible is written to really address those cultures. I have it actually here, but my time is more than up.
Okay.
But,
I can ask you later too.
so here it's, these empires, Sumer, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria.
Okay,
and
those are considered the Near
Yeah,
East.
ancient Near East.
Got it.
And why that's useful and significant. But, so, yeah, I hope it'll be a good study. I'm really looking forward to it, and